much, Farai. I greatly appreciate the platform. Thank you for having me on. I just wanted to also say a quick word of thanks for having organized these talks on a weekly basis. I've attended the ones that I can attend, and they've been very helpful. So as somebody who's in the community, who's also trying to find my way along this path, just want to say a quick word of thanks for your efforts. They're very much appreciated. So I think to get going, I should share my screen. So let me try this. Can you see my screen?
Sure, we are good. We can see.
Okay. So I think today's discussion, quite informal, very high level. I think over the weeks we've had the opportunity to listen to a few experts on the technical side, discussing the considerations around the development of quantum solutions and ideas. So I think this week it'd be interesting to switch it over a little bit and have a look at the commercial side. So once you've done your hard work with regards to developing a solution that could potentially be marketed, let's look a little bit around the considerations that you'd need to keep in mind if you're looking to take something to market. Always very happy to stay in touch with the community. So if at any point in time you'd like to reach out just to connect, or with any questions after this presentation, please feel free to drop me an email. My email address is at the bottom of the slide. That's lesedimodise@gmail.com. I think Farai did a really good job of an intro, so I won't spend too much time discussing my background and how I arrived, in the quantum area. But what I will do is just
sorry, Lesedi, I'm not sure. Sorry, just interrupt. Sorry, could you get that full screen in some way, or it's my view?
Oh, let me see.
Or perhaps it's fine. I'm not sure.
Is that better?
Now it's yeah, that's better now. I think that's
Are you seeing a full screen?
I think so. I think we're good. I think that's the full screen that we see now.
Okay. So I think what I was saying was, look, the introduction that Farai provided was very comprehensive, but just to give you a sense of my background and where I'm at on the spectrum. So I'm on the finance side of the spectrum. I have a background in business and currently work in the investments space. But do have a keen interest in quantum. And my keen interest in quantum is predominantly around its potential for solutions in the area of drug discovery. And to give you a little bit of a flavor for what I mean by that, essentially, as a South African, I've noticed that there is a significant HIV problem that I think was front of mind for a very long time, but perhaps isn't so today. And my keen interest really is in exploring the potential for quantum solutions in the area for drug discovery, and specifically HIV and AIDS drug discovery. So to give you a lay of the land, let's have a look at the HIV problem in Africa. The current situation as it stands is that of the 26 million HIV positive people worldwide, approximately 70% of these people live in sub-Saharan Africa. 91% of the world's HIV positive children are also based in Africa. And what we also understand of the virus and the pandemic today is that South Africa specifically has, I would say, the most acute incidence of the pandemic, with about 20% of the population currently living with HIV. So basically what this tells us is it's very much still an issue, even though, we have maybe situations like COVID-19 that are more front of mind, and you find maybe higher profile, if I may put it that way, long-term diseases such as cancer, predominantly occupying the headlines today. What I would say is that HIV is definitely still a problem, and it's overwhelmingly an African problem, just based on the numbers as they stand today. So for me, this is really what motivates my area of interest, with my being South African. In terms of what we've looked at to try and address the situation, where we're at in terms of solutions is predominantly ART, so antiretroviral therapy. So essentially, the majority of people, so 68% of adults and 53% of children living with HIV globally today, are on some kind of long-term or lifelong treatment of ARVs. What we've also seen in very rare instances, so in 2 cases, is something along the lines of a functional cure, where 2 individuals received a bone marrow transplant, and in that way were able to get an infusion of new CD4 T cells that are not able to be infected by HIV. So basically what that means is you have, in effect, a temporary cure, but a very, let's call it expensive and inaccessible functional cure. So essentially the lay of the land as it stands is that we have an overwhelmingly African problem, and we don't really have a solution or a fix. We have a lifelong therapy that works when you have access to the therapy, but I think we found that in terms of accessibility and simple things along the lines of being able to maintain a healthy lifestyle and a healthy diet that includes balanced fruit, vegetable, etc. This is not always easy or straightforward on the average income of your African, right? So what it does say to me is that, we need better answers, or we need more effective solutions. And essentially what that would look like long-term, to my mind, would be an accessible cure or a vaccine that would be able to protect the people currently at risk of contracting HIV, and then a cure that would remove or eliminate the virus from the body. And this is not something that we have today, but there is potential for quantum computing to be particularly helpful in this area. If you look at what the problem itself is, just boiled down to its basic components, it's essentially the fact that, as much as and indeed, there has been a lot of focus on drug discovery for HIV and AIDS for a number of years now. The major issue in its core is that it's very, very time consuming or resource consumptive to bring what would be a potential therapy or drug candidate to market. It essentially costs a lot of money, and it is, from a computational perspective, quite challenging. And the nice thing about quantum technology is that it provides us with a potential solution to address these 2 parts, right? Quantum computing or quantum technologies are able to dramatically accelerate the pace at which you can screen for potentially effective drug candidates. So a process that might have originally, or in the first instance, taken 10 plus years in order to screen a vast number of molecules in order to arrive at what you think could be an effective drug candidate, is a time-consumptive process. And quantum technology is something that could dramatically improve the pace at which we're able to do that. More than that, and I guess in addition to that, it's that slowly but surely quantum technologies are becoming more and more accessible. So we've recently seen, around 2018, 2019, IBM open IBM Q Lab at WITS. And so the IBM Q Lab is doing a lot of interesting research, but specifically, or a highlight amongst its research is the fact that researchers at WITS are actually using the IBM Q Lab and quantum computing to look into basically HIV drug discovery. And this is essentially how myself and Farai crossed paths. I became very interested in the work that they were doing, and reached out. And so that's essentially how I was able to find myself in this space, given the fact that I have more of a finance background as opposed to a technical background in quantum. But nevertheless, super happy to be here. And what I will do is I will keep this more at a high level. So as I mentioned, I'd like to give you all a flavor for some of the considerations that as an investor, I would keep in mind if I were, for example, having a conversation with you around maybe your idea. Say you're working on something and you'd like to bring it to market. If you and I were having a conversation, this presentation at a high level outlines the sort of things that I would suggest that you keep in mind. So enough about my background, my story, and how I arrived here. I think the important thing is if we step back and we look at the potential for quantum in Africa. First question that we need to ask ourselves is, well, what do we expect quantum technologies to be able to do in industry, right? So if we're looking at the problem and we're saying we have quantum technology, we know that, you know, at some point in time, this could be a game changer in a number of industries or businesses. What's the potential for it, both on a global scale and specifically in Africa? Where can quantum be applied? Where can we extract the most value for what is a technology really still in its incipiency? So we know four things, right? We know that quantum or quantum methods are really good at solving four types of, let's call them buckets of problems, right? The first big bucket of problems that quantum is really good at solving is, you know, optimization type problems, right? So these would be multivariate problems that you're trying to solve at great speed. And so the second big bucket, which is also maybe a subset of optimization, is quantum AI. Right. So quantum AI basically allows for more effective machine learning with the pace at which neural networks can be established and then run through. Then we have, you know, the major big bucket, which is quantum simulation, and this touches on the point that I mentioned earlier on drug discovery. Right. So this simulation of it helps you to build complex models in a way that your classical computer wouldn't be able to handle. They would become too unwieldy as your models become increasingly complex. And the classic example on the simulation side is basically simulating molecules, right? Getting a computer representation of a molecule so that you're effectively able to predict how that molecule will behave when you introduce, you know, various proteins and inhibitors, etc. And then the last big bucket where we know that the quantum can be helpful and effective is in cryptography, right? And so these are all your applications around cybersecurity. So bearing these things in mind, so we have a really good idea of where we think quantum tools could be useful. So the question then becomes, okay, if we know that we can achieve, you know, potentially quantum supremacy in these areas, which industries would benefit the most from that? So here I borrowed the thoughts of McKinsey and just looked at a study that they put out, I think last year or the year before. And this one was basically saying, you know, if we look at a wide range of industries, and this is industries spanning from, you know, the consumer goods area to your advanced industries like engineering to your oil and gas, it's saying if we were to spread out, you know, business types or industry sectors and give some thought to, you know, in terms of the near term, which of these sectors are most likely to adopt and extract value from quantum technologies. And then also then phrase the question and say, okay, then extending that question and looking out into the medium term as well as into the long term, how much value can be extracted from, or rather maybe phrasing the question differently, saying, what is the economic potential from quantum solutions in that industry? So if, for example, you look at the chart that I have on the right-hand side of the page, what this tells us is that of the experts that McKinsey was able to reach out to and survey, overwhelmingly, the majority of those experts believe that the near-term applications for quantum, where you can extract value, so between now and 2025, would be in the area of finance, overwhelmingly. Right? And the view of these experts is that in the medium term, the estimated value at stake, or basically the economic impact of these technologies in the medium term, would be high. And that's why the bubble there is light blue. And in the long term, and by the long term here we mean 2035 and beyond, the potential value impact of quantum solutions or technologies in the area of finance expected to be high as well. And so we have, you know, so we've kind of spread out the landscape of key industries, with finance being the clear winner in the near term, and also expected to extract massive sort of economic or value gains in the medium term and the long term. But if we go down the spectrum, we can see some some sectors like advanced industry, so this would be your engineering, similar situation. Perhaps in the near term, not so much expected to be adopted and implemented, and that's just because it takes time for systems and processes to change. But in the medium term and in the long term, with the medium term, just as a reminder, being somewhere around 2025, these industries, your engineering and your more complex industries, expected to extract again huge value from quantum solutions. Pharma, somewhere towards the middle of the scale, with the medium-term value anticipated to be, let's say, low, but with the long-term value that could be extracted from things like, you know, quantum computing for drug discovery being especially high. All the way down at the bottom of the ladder, where we think that there may not be any sort of near-term benefit to implementing quantum solutions, we see sectors and business models in the consumer goods space and in the insurance space, for example, where the expert opinion is that, you know, there's not so much that you'd be able to do with quantum technology and solutions in these sectors in the near term. And when we sort of expand that lens out to the medium term and the long term, again, these experts saying that, look, we don't think that there would be so much economic value that can be unlocked or extracted from applying these solutions and technologies. So this, what we've just run through, is your expert opinion, basically, of the potential for quantum on a global scale, right? Looking not only at, you know, what the potential is today, but also looking at what the potential is, you know, in the near term and in the long term. And what's clear is that, you know, we have some industries like finance, where the rewards are expected to be massive and immediate. And then we also have, you know, some industries or business models and sector spaces like consumer. So this would be your fast food retail, your grocery stores, any sort of consumer-facing business, really, that you can imagine. It's not expected that quantum technologies will be particularly applicable and even relevant, right, or helpful in those sectors. So the question is, if that's what we know about what quantum can do, and this is what we're expecting quantum to achieve, so in terms of economic benefit on a global picture, what do we expect to be the case for Africa, right? Do we expect sort of similar conclusions, in the sense that are we minded to believe that, you know, in Africa, given that we have unique problems and the lie of the land isn't the same as in the developed market, are we expecting that in the near term, the major sectors that win from adopting potentially game-changing technology like quantum in its various forms, are we expecting that to be finance in the near term, in the medium term, in the long term? And are we expecting there to be really no applicability or relevance of your quantum solutions in the area of consumer goods, right, which is the bulk of the African economy? I'm even tempted to take a poll at this point, just to get a sense for where your opinions lie before I move into my own thoughts. Farai, you should let me know if that functionality has been activated. But if not, then I'll just move into my own conclusions and opinions.
Good try. Let's see.
All right. Well, why don't we try to take a quick snap poll? So, who? And this is literally just by picking, right? Let's assume hypothetically that the African economy is predominantly consumer-facing, which means that the bulk of the economic activity would be on the area of, you know, consumer goods, etc., and less of the African economy or African would be determined by your pharmaceuticals development, your advanced industries, etc. So, and finance. So just by, let's say, a show of hands, let's take a quick poll. Let's see what your opinions are. You can give an indication of finance if you believe that for Africa specifically, the major sort of sectors that will benefit from quantum would be your finance, your advanced industries, your pharma, and you can write consumer maybe in the the comments box if you feel like the sectors that are likely to benefit from quantum technologies in the African landscape are more along the lines of your consumer goods and your consumer-facing businesses. I'll pause right here. I'll give you a few minutes to put your thoughts down in the comment box. Yeah, I see most of the responses coming in say finance, your formal services. One says agriculture, medical, pharma, chemistry. Yeah, very interesting. Very interesting. Yeah, so I mean, I would have thought the same, right? I think initially when looking at this problem, physics research, pharma, finance, telecom. Yeah. I think we have responses from most people on the call. So yeah, quite right. It would seem the opinion of the One Quantum community on this platform is that really the African experience is quite likely to align with the global experience, which is to say that those industries where you expect there to be immediate benefit from applying your quantum solutions, quantum technologies will be along the lines of your finance industries, your advanced industries, pharma and medical products, IT and telecoms, of course. And etc. And what we're then saying is that we expect your consumer-facing businesses to not really factor into the picture or the discussion very much when we think about the potential for quantum solutions in Africa. What I have actually seen in my experience as an investor in the space, and let me resume my share. What I've actually seen is the opposite. So let me give you a little bit of color on really the sort of investment role that I play. So at Sango Capital, we are a Johannesburg-based fund manager. Like Farai rightly mentioned, we manage at this point in time a little bit over 400 million in assets under management. And the strategy that we deploy is both fund of funds, which means that we make investments into other fund managers across the continent, as well as direct investments, which means we might make an investment as in deploy capital into an actual business. What that kind of strategy, this hybrid strategy of fund and funds and directs means is that we just have a lot of visibility on what people are investing in the continent, not only on the basis of our own investment activity, but also because we have good visibility on what other managers, so basically people who do a very similar role to what we do, we have good visibility on what other fund managers are also looking at and what they're deploying capital into. And on the basis of that, on the basis of a pretty comprehensive a view as to where capital is flowing, which investments are quite interesting at this point in time, it would appear that in the African context and on the African landscape, those businesses that are implementing your AI and complex optimization problems are overwhelmingly on the consumer-facing side. So we've seen some business models on the agri-tech side, what I like to call e-distribution, as well as on the transport side. So let me chat you through some specific business models, talk you through essentially how the business is structured and how it works, and then make a small case to motivate that I strongly feel that these types of businesses are more likely to be the first adopters of quantum technology before your finance, before your pharma, before even your engineering sort of applications, businesses and sectors. And that's because the need for quantum solutions in these businesses is immediate. So the benefit of adopting these technologies in these businesses, again, is immediate. And obviously the long-term benefit will have significant sort of economic impact. So the first business model, and this is by no stretch of the imagination all the business models that are using these types of technologies. These are just examples of 3 specific business models that I've come across fairly recently and have actually looked quite carefully at in the context of making a potential investment. The first type of business model, and this one is specifically an agri-tech player that we're looking at based on the continent. What it does is it essentially is an AI and data company in the food and agriculture space. And so their business model is essentially set up as a platform where, you know, there might be a number of subscribers who would, you know, pay a subscription fee in order to have access to a platform. And that platform is a repository. So it amalgamates or it combines a whole array of information that's sort of agriculture and climate related into a single searchable platform. So if you can imagine yourself as a farmer in a remote part of Morocco, and you're interested in knowing what the soil acidity is, what the rainfall might be over the next couple of weeks, and what the humidity in the area would be. Instead of having to mine this data yourself and going to disparate websites and trying to accumulate the data from different types of data sources, you would log on to this single platform that basically consolidates, it curates and consolidates all this information and then standardizes it so that you can search it, right, for various phrases or for various words. This platform would be essentially something that mines its data from the full web. And its sort of advantage is that it uses machine learning, right, to present, you know, very complex data sets that can include, you know, some of the information that we just talked about, things like humidity, soil acidity, etc., in a user-friendly and interactive manner. This business is currently operational. It's a business that's already valued in excess of $500 million. So already making significant progress in the space, already attracting a large amount of capital. And I think the important thing to bear in mind and identify is that its whole business model is predicated on its ability to have some kind of advantage with regards to its machine learning. So the more effective it is at machine learning, in order to present, you know, complex data sets in a way that you and I can use and digest easily, the better it is, the more defensible the business model is. So there's a clear advantage to this type of business, for this type of business, in investing in AI and other sort of optimization tools. So a business like this would be, I think, first in line, and would be quite keen to explore the potential for, you know, quantum AI, because that would dramatically make its business model or its proposition better, right? So the better the machine learning in the proposition, the better the tool. Right? Another business model that I've seen fairly recently is something that I call e-distribution. And this one is, it's a company that specializes in B2B e-commerce and distribution. So basically the business model here is like supply chain optimization, basically. So to use a hypothetical example, if you can imagine like a bunch of mom and pop corner stores. So let's take the example of Zimbabwe. Farai, you're in Zimbabwe, you're in Harare right now, yes? Yeah. So if you were to take the example of Harare, and you would assume that, you know, or I assume, and I could be wrong, but my understanding is that really the way that it would be set up is, as opposed to your a proliferation of your large shopping malls and shopping centers, the solution for in terms of buying your groceries, and that is much smaller in scale. So you have a higher prevalence of your sort of mom and pop corner store, and it's at this store that you would buy all your groceries, for example. And in this kind of format or in this setup, it's really less formal, because, you know, you have a very fragmented, a very wide network of small little mom and pop stores that are catering for essentially what is a large population. And what those mom and pop corner stores would do in order to restock, right, their inventory, is that they would, for example, go to the local guy who supplies rice to get their rice. They would go to the local guy who supplies sugar to get their sugar. And on certain instances, it might be that your guy who supplies your sugar doesn't have some, or he doesn't have the exact kind that you're looking for. So it's not efficient, and it's also one of those very highly fragmented sort of supply chain processes where it can get even expensive, not only for the operator, so the person who operates the store, because there's not a lot of visibility on the price that you will pay for, you know, a certain quantity of rice today versus next month or next couple of weeks even. Versus if you were to flip it around and say, look, if you were to standardize this process, if you were to have a more efficient distribution or supply chain management, where you have a single distribution hub that caters for a wide sort of geographic area, what you have is you have better transparency on price, you have better availability of product, and you also have more efficient distribution of that product. So that's basically essentially what this business model here tries to do, or is the solution that it puts forward. How it works is that you have an e-platform, and in the same way that I or you might go online to shop for clothing or whatever, this e-platform basically allows people who operate small, you know, convenience stores to go on the platform and then restock, so shop for inventory. And in that way, what they're able to do is it's super convenient, right? So it eliminates all the legwork. And what it allows you to do is it allows you to have, as somebody who runs a store, it allows you to have greater visibility on how much you're stocking and how much you're going to pay for that stock. And it also actually gives you a little bit of visibility on getting exactly the stock that you're looking for. So it solves an accessibility problem, it solves a pricing problem, and it's also super convenient. Now, how this platform, so at a high level, this platform essentially does for these mom and pop grocery stores what Amazon does for me or you, right? It's like a fulfillment model, and it basically revolutionizes and streamlines the whole supply chain model, the whole supply chain. Now, this business model uses proprietary technology along the lines of AI to essentially predict even, right, what your small store will need in terms of its stocking requirements this week, next week, and the week after, which then dramatically improves the availability of product, right? Because if this e-distribution player is able to predict what people are going to be wanting to buy in the future, then it'll make sure that good or that particular commodity is always available. And so your mom and pop stores have no issue, right, getting access to the certain type of bean or the certain type of rice or the certain type of sugar that they're looking to stock. And that's where the quantum part comes in, right? Because it essentially uses a lot of data points, which it aggregates over a period of time to get a good sense for what people are likely to want to order. And in that way, it's able to optimize basically the whole supply chain, making sure that the availability of certain products is always on hand. This business currently operational, attracting capital already, and is valued somewhere in excess of $100 million. So already making significant impact, and certainly one where investment in quantum AI would give it better predictive capability, right? Would make it more able to predict what people are likely to want to order. And in that way, it would improve the business model. So clear advantage for their investing in AI in the near term. And then the last business model that I want to, just glancing at time so that we don't go over. The last business model that I want to quickly touch on is on the transport side. Also consumer facing. This one is an African player that's an intercity bus ride hailing application. And so in the same way that you and I would use Uber to get online to hail a cab, what you're able to do in certain African cities with the help of these types of platforms is you can get online to book a bus ticket. So a bus ticket that'll take you from this city to the next city. Same model as, you know, your cab hailing, and the quantum advantage here is that it solves a dynamic optimization problem. So the developers of this platform are able now to introduce, or are looking to introduce, a dynamic pricing system. And what the dynamic pricing system basically does is it says, look, as this company that has this option for you to hail a bus, an intercity bus ride, we operate a number of routes on any given day. And so the platform basically gets in real time feedback from the market as to which routes are, in demand today. Also gets, feedback or inputs, information, sometimes subtle, sometimes not so subtle, around, okay, maybe there are road closures, or maybe there's even a limited availability of petrol on certain routes because there are gas shortages, etc. It takes into account all these various data points and then optimizes the function so that you're able to basically say, okay, we're going to run these routes today, and this is the price that we're going to charge for those routes. And so very complex here, optimization problem in which you're essentially solving for the best price and at a limited number of routes for the day. And this kind of complex optimization problem can be done with today's technologies, but can be significantly improved potentially with the introduction of more sophisticated technologies that are able to run more sophisticated optimization or more complex optimization problems. And so in this area, maybe not today, but certainly in the future, I think the application for quantum optimization might be present, and players in this sort of space might be looking to invest in that area. I think the key takeaway from having looked at just these three examples of business models is that, mass market quantum solutions are applicable in Africa. There are businesses that already today might be looking to invest in them, and overwhelmingly those businesses that are. So overwhelmingly those businesses that might be first to invest in these solutions are on the consumer side of the spectrum, as opposed to, let's say, for example, your finance, IT, banking side of the spectrum, which is a little bit of an overturn of expectations, but I think as with a lot of things on this continent, things just work a bit differently here. So now moving into, I think the last thing that I wanted to quickly chat about is just some high-level considerations for quantum entrepreneurs. It's just to touch on a few, let's say, guidelines and pieces of advice that I might put out there or throw your way. If you are on the technical side of things, you have a wonderful quantum idea, you want to bring it to market, but don't really know that process by which you're going to commercialize it, I would suggest that you just keep a few key things in mind. And I've summarized those on this page, and I'll go through those fairly quickly. So I've bucketed these considerations into two main groups. The first one is everything to do with basically your concept and product development, right? And the second bucket of considerations is basically to do with everything about financing your idea. Because it seems to me anytime I hear tech startup, myself and most people tend to think venture capital at the same time. So I think we'll spend a little bit of time addressing that, because venture capital might not necessarily be the financing solution for you. So I think in terms of your idea itself, if you're looking to commercialize it, what I would suggest that you do is work with your constraints. Right? We as Africans on the African continent need solutions that work. Right? So allow your constraints, and maybe those are on the financial side, maybe that's on the accessibility side. Allow your constraints to sort of motivate your innovation or drive your innovation process. Right? Allow the fact that you don't necessarily have access to a physical quantum computer. Allow that to be the thing that prompts you to use your online quantum, computing solutions, which is exactly what the IBM Q offering is. So work with your constraints, right? Don't try to work against your constraints. I think the second sort of major point that I would put out there is it's important to know your market. Right? You need to sort of make sure that you're looking to solve an unmet need that addresses what would be a long-term hard problem. And by a hard problem, I mean these problems that tend to be more persistent, that can't be solved with the tools that we have available today. Right? Then it makes sense for you to apply something that's a novel technology or a novel tool to try and address the problem. The third key consideration that I would say you should keep in mind is make sure that your business is scalable. Have a look at your market, identify the market, make sure that your market itself is big enough, because trust me, if you're looking to attract funding for your business model, this will be a key marker that your investors will be looking at, right? They'll want to know that your business has an opportunity to scale, because this ultimately will be a key growth marker. And most investors are looking to invest in growth. And then I think the last two I'll probably just lump together and say, look, at the end of the day, you want to propose a solution that's appropriate, right? I think a lot of the discussion that we've just had preceding this highlighted the fact that, you know, what you think will be the relevant solution or the relevant application for a specific tool in Africa is not the same as, you know, might be the case in Europe or in other developed markets, right? So I would say when you're looking at your solution, bear in mind that really as Africans, we need solutions that work, right? We don't necessarily need something that's very sophisticated and is best in class. We just need something that's appropriate for our context, that will meet the needs of the people, that will be accessible, and that will be affordable. So I would bear these key characteristics in mind as I go about thinking about what kind of solution do I want to bring to the marketplace. And then, of course, you need to bear in mind things around your route to market. So, you know, the competition, the regulatory environment, and how exactly you're going to get your concept or your product or offering from your side to the customer side, right? Whether that's, you know, through fulfillment, like the business model that we talked about, where you're actually moving goods and, or units, or whether that's like, you know, you have a platform and people are able to log onto your platform and engage that way. So these are all the high level considerations that I suggest that you keep in mind. But now moving on to the financing side of things. Oftentimes when people have a very smart, a very attractive idea, the assumption is that, you know, what I need to do is get myself a VC partner or a VC investor. And I wouldn't say this is necessarily the case, right? I think you need to ask yourself those key questions. So go about it in a systematic way. You need to ask yourself, you know, in the first instance, do I need this funding? And how much do I need? Which might sound like a simple question, but it certainly warrants some careful consideration, right? It's something to give good thought in advance. Why? Because both debt and equity have costs associated with them, and you want to be sure that it's worth your while to incur those costs. At a very high level, I would say the following. So I've put on the page there a small chart that basically shows the business life cycle, where on the y-axis, on the vertical axis, you have sales. So something that actually generates revenue. And then, you know, on the x-axis or the horizontal axis, you have time. And what you'll notice is that in the beginning, as a business is very young, its cash flow generation is low or zero. As the business then matures, you'll find that it's able to generate cash. Now, basically, in a nutshell, what I would say to you is if you're considering debt financing, this is really more appropriate for your more mature business models that actually generate consistent cash flows and are able to pay down their debt. So if you have a new idea and this thing isn't producing, you know, stable cash flows, isn't making sales and isn't producing earnings, then debt is not the solution for you from a financing perspective. So then you might say, okay, given that I have an idea and I don't necessarily have a business that actually works or runs, what I might want to do then is look at equity investment. And the answer is yes, potentially, but what type of equity is most appropriate for you? And I think there are two big buckets. I mean, you can parse these buckets and make them arbitrarily sort of detailed, but two big buckets I'd say are out there. So there's the venture bucket, and then there's the private equity bucket. The key difference between these two types of equity is that the venture will be more interested in sort of investing capital into business models where there is the potential for future sales, but you don't necessarily need to demonstrate your sales today. So if you have an idea and you feel like you've got the concept, you've done the development, so you know that in theory it should work, but you don't yet have the sales or you don't yet have the earnings, then a VC investor might be willing to have a look at your business model, go through a number of funding rounds in order to give it the capital that it requires for further development, so that it gets to the point that it's able to produce, you know, revenue. Naturally, you should bear in mind, though, and this will be a consideration that I bring out in a second, is that, you know, this is not costless, right? You're giving up some equity in the company in order to get this investment. But the difference between VC and private equity at a high level is that private equity more favors your larger, more stable sort of, or rather your more mature businesses, not necessarily larger. So private equity investors also like to see the potential for growth, right? So for future earnings generation, but they like to invest in cash today. So what you would want to demonstrate to a private equity investor, somebody like me, is that you already have sales and you already have earnings, but this is the potential to grow those earnings by an extra amount if you get a certain amount of investment today to help you with product development, to help you with working capital, etc. Key thing to bear in mind is equity in general, whether that's venture capital or private equity, is expensive, right? It's more expensive than debt because in both those instances, you're giving up some of your company in order to get investment today. The last type of funding that I want to cover quickly today is your grant funding. And I think of the different types of funding that we have on the spectrum here, this is by far the cheapest. And that's just because it's essentially the government believing in your great idea and giving you the opportunity to do something with that without necessarily requiring you to provide them with a return on their capital. Sometimes that's necessary, sometimes that's not. So this type of funding applicable at any stage of the business, right? This can be grant funding can be obtained by your more mature businesses, or it can be obtained by your more startup type businesses that don't have a business plan, or rather don't have a business profile that generates consistent cash flows yet. So grant funding, by far the most flexible and by far the most benign, I would say, in terms of its cost to you as the entrepreneur. So the key takeaway there would be, if you can, rather go for something like grant funding. As much as it's not as sexy as venture capital, it probably will be more appropriate for you because you won't be on the hook to deliver returns to an equity investor. And obviously you won't necessarily need to demonstrate those consistent cash flows that you have to demonstrate if you're taking on debt, right, to pay down your debt. So that's roughly, the considerations that I would throw at you in a very quick and high-level discussion. I would open the session up now for Q&A for but I think we may be close to time. So I think I will leave it there, and I will hand back to Farai just to let us know whether you'd like to open this one up to questions or whether you'd like to go straight into the cocktail session.
I don't even know what to say, but I think we really needed that conversation, and you said all the things that that are necessary for people on quantum and for quantum tech to develop in the continent. I hope you can hear me. I'm just having a terrible network on my end.
Yeah, I can hear you.
So sounds good. So yeah, I'm not sure how much time you have because you may be rushing, but we had a few questions I was going to say to you. In your conversations with companies across Africa, have you ever had the mention of quantum in the pitches that you come across? Just so we learn that the continent is also, there's things that people are learning as well.
Yeah, sorry, Farai, I'm actually struggling to hear you there. Could you just repeat that question?
Okay, sorry. I was saying, have you ever come across startups or businesses that are mentioning quantum in their strategy across Africa in any way?
Yeah. So the businesses that we have come across don't specifically mention quantum, but they certainly mention the applications of quantum, right? So they'll talk about your machine learning, they'll talk about your AI, and they'll talk about your optimization. So by and large, this is what we're encountering, with the anticipation that over time, as quantum solutions become more accessible, these same players will then adopt the more effective quantum solutions in their individual or respective contexts. But right now, you're not necessarily seeing direct investment into quantum. I think it's too early or too much in its incipiency to attract your private equity and even your VC on the African continent. I'm not sure if that answers your question, Farai.
Okay, so I was saying you could take questions from the chat box.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, Farai, your line is quite bad. What I understood was that, we could take some questions from the chat before closing up. So I think we'll do just that. I'm not able to hear you. I think there might be a connection issue. So what I'll do is I do need to jump in a moment, but what I'll do is I'll take maybe one question from the chat, and then we can wrap up. So I'll scroll down and I'll see which one was the most burning question. If it came up twice, I'll take that one. Let's see. Yeah, so I think the question that came up at least more than once is, what steps do you suggest as Africans we should take to create value within quantum computing? And to be honest, this one here is the same sort of advice that I would give to anybody looking to create value in the African economy, right? And it touches on really the core principles that we've already discussed at a high level. Is that really what you should be looking to do is solve problems that are specific to this landscape and use the tools at your disposal. So what I mean by that specifically is, if you're looking to unlock value, establish which one of the problems that it is facing your community or facing the population at large that really is challenging, for which there is no existing solution, and for which the tools that you have can address, right, in a meaningful way. What I would suggest that you bear in mind here is that it's not necessary for you as somebody looking to implement quantum solutions to try the best in class solution. This is oftentimes, unnecessary, right? It's oftentimes expensive, and it makes the end product inaccessible to your user. So given that in our context, what would be most effective are your affordable and accessible solutions, it's better for you to, rather than assume or try to pursue a best-in-class solution, try to pursue a more appropriate solution, right? One that is appropriate for your context. And I think in that way, your application of quantum technologies to the African landscape will be quite value added, right? It'll make what is a very sophisticated, very fancy sounding technology accessible to just everybody. And I think that's where the biggest benefit is for this technology in the long term. With that being said, and with us being exactly on time, I'm gonna leave it there. Thank you so much, Farai, for having me on. It was a sincere pleasure.
Thank you, Lesedi. Let's pick up on other platforms. I really appreciate it. All the best with your meeting today.
No worries, no worries. Thank you for having me on.
Sounds good. Thanks. Cheers. Okay, thank you everyone. Let's catch up on the cocktail. Have a good day and thank you for coming.